If you're a sensitive person, you may have been told you are the problem, that if only you weren't so sensitive, everything would be okay. Yet sensitivity, when respected and valued, can be a most wondrous superpower. As we live in an often insensitive world that is hyper-focused on external appearances and material success, it's important to slow down, to notice that embracing and protecting our sensitivity is a wise move. Today, we'll focus on this listener's real life question. From the time I was a kid, I've been told I'm too sensitive. My dad, who was critical and abusive, was constantly telling me to get tougher so I could get ahead in life. I've tried to toughen up, but it never worked for me. It's caused me a lot of pain and shame and still does. What's your advice? And with that question as the focus of today's episode, I'm Dr. Carla Marie Manley, and this is Imperfect Love.
Welcome to Imperfect Love with Dr. Carla Marie Manley, psychologist, author, and relationship expert. I'm here to help unravel mysteries and misconceptions about love, relationships, and mental health issues, plus everything in between. Love is complicated, people are not perfect, and relationships surely can be tough. Together, we'll navigate this messy, imperfect space of real life.
Today, I'm joined by a very special guest, Rebecca Strong, known as Bex, who will be sharing her expertise on using sensitivity as a superpower and embracing music for self-care. Welcome to the podcast, Bex. It's such a joy to be with you today. Thanks for joining us.
Of course, thanks for having me. So glad to be here.
Well, thank you for joining us. Now, you are so many things. So you're an extraordinary person. You're a singer, you're a musician, you're a songwriter, you're a freelance writer, and I think that's just the tip of the iceberg. So before we launch into sensitivity as a superpower, what makes you you?
Well, ever since I was a little kid, creativity was a big part of my life. I've always kind of dabbled in different creative pursuits, and I've hopped around from screenwriting to songwriting to filmmaking and photography and so many different creative outlets. But I think a core part of that is my sensitivity. I think I've at least found in life that a lot of artists are highly sensitive people. I think that can really benefit you in really any form of art. So I would say that when I think about like my core traits, sensitivity is one of the first that comes to mind. And I've just in this chapter of life been trying to look for ways to channel that for good. So
Now, I've listened to a lot of your music, which is
oh,
amazing. You are a phenomenal singer. And you did this one song that just all of your songs are beautiful, but I love the one on sensitivity. Can
mm.
you just tell us a little bit about that particular song?
Yeah, so the song is called Sensitive. It released in March of this past year of 2023. And I wrote it a couple years ago. It felt very much like a cathartic song to write. It felt like I had been having these feelings for a while that had been slowly mounting, which were kind of reflecting on the fact that I had grown up with this idea that my sensitivity meant like it was a weakness or it was a negative trait that I should be ashamed of. And as soon as I entered my 30s, I felt like I started kind of taking a step back and thinking like, I don't really think that's true. And so the song was very much sort of it was making a statement and taking my power back and sort of saying, no, I don't accept that this is a negative thing about me. And here's why, and so it almost felt like writing a journal entry to write that song. It was like so personal. And so I put off releasing it for a couple years because it almost felt too vulnerable and too personal. And then I reached a point where I was like, I don't think I can sit on this any longer. I feel like I really need to share it with people. And so yeah, it's been really awesome to hear feedback that so many people relate to the song. And a lot of people that related to it, I was sort of surprised. It was unexpected. I heard from a lot of men in my life that I didn't expect to hear from, saying like, wow, this resonates so deeply with me. And I always felt like I had to hide my sensitivity. And so that's just been so rewarding to hear.
I love that you heard from a lot of men, because when we think of sensitive people, particularly highly sensitive people, we
Yeah.
think of women. But
Yeah.
I really am with you, and in fact, the listener's question, I didn't give away the gender, but it happened to come from a man. And
Mm.
so we can see that we would almost naturally think it must be a woman, writing in about that. But when we look at how women are taught to hide their sensitivity because, as you said, it can be seen as a weakness. But men, oh my goodness, the number of clients have worked with over the years who were told to man up, you
Mm.
know,
Yeah.
let it be like water off a duck's back. Get tougher, get stronger, be like a man, whatever that is means. But so is there back to your song, is there a
Mm.
phrase or a few phrases that are especially meaningful to you from that song, Sensitivity?
It's funny, the whole chorus, the whole gist of the chorus is, so what if I am sensitive? And that was kind of the first line that sparked the song. Is I was sitting there literally thinking like, so I'm sensitive. Why is that being hurled at me like it's an insult, you know? And so I started with, so what if I am sensitive? And then from there, I went back and started writing the verses, which kind of reveal more insight into what it's like to be a highly sensitive person. So like in verse 2, there's a line, my emotions, they run deep and I wear them all right up on my sleeve. Damn right. You tell me I should think twice, but I have nothing to hide. And the idea behind that was, to some people, it's almost threatening or off-putting when someone expresses their emotions so easily because they don't know how to deal with that. It's like they weren't taught to express or cope with someone else's emotional expression. And so they turn it around on you like it's a bad thing, you know, but in a way it's like, how beautiful that I don't have to suppress how I'm feeling in the moment. You know, I don't have anything to hide. I want you to know how I'm feeling, and there's nothing wrong with that. So yeah, that was kind of the idea there.
Well, you did a magnificent job, because I think our listener or any person who has ever been in that position where they were told they are too sensitive. I love the part where you just naturally said, they hurl this at me as if it's an insult,
Mm.
instead of realizing that sensitivity, when embraced and understood and well used, is a tremendous gift. What would
Yeah.
the world be like without our sensitive
Mhm.
people? I wouldn't want to live there. Our sensitive people make the world as positive as it is today. So I'm with you on that. I have a question for you. In
Mhm.
your childhood, did you get a message that sensitivity, was there any implicit or explicit message from your family of origin that sensitivity wasn't an asset?
Oh, definitely. I so related to the listener's question and sort of their childhood experiences. It's interesting. My mother is definitely a very sensitive person. So you would think that she would have sort of had compassion for those same parts in me, but I think maybe because she struggled with her own sensitivity, she couldn't deal with it when, you know, I showcased that particular quality. And so I do remember a lot of times growing up feeling really hurt by something she said or did. and having it brushed off like, well, you're just too sensitive, because she didn't want to have to take responsibility, for saying I'm sorry for whatever she did. And so looking back, I can kind of see that now. But when you're a child, you don't you don't have that kind of understanding of people yet. You don't really like understand why people say the things they say. And so at the time, I really internalized that message of like, I'm too sensitive and that's a bad thing. And so then it becomes really difficult as you get older and people hurt your feelings to tell, like, so am I allowed to feel upset about this? Is this warranted? Am I overreacting? It becomes really hard to like know when your feelings are valid. So yeah, it was very difficult.
And I can really, looking at your background and the listener's question, when
Mhm.
you're given those messages from a parent, from a caregiver, from teachers, whoever it is in early life, all of that, you're right, is internalized. So you grow up thinking this sensitivity, this ability to
Mm,
feel is a bad thing. And
mm,
our ability to feel is, to me, what makes us or can make us wise.
yeah.
Because without our feelings, we just have mere intellect, and intellect without feelings, a pretty dangerous thing. Right? We
Mm,
can do, and as you said, people will use it as an insult and use somebody else's sensitivity and deflect and say, oh, Bex, you're too sensitive, rather
right.
than saying, oh, let me see how I've hurt your feelings, or let me see how I've participated in this issue, and let's work to create a safer environment.
Yeah.
And it does, and many people don't get that. So
Right.
was your dad the same? Your experience with your dad, was it similar?
Yeah, my dad, I was mostly raised by my mom. She was a single mother. So my dad was kind of in and out of my life, but there were times that he was more involved. He struggled with addiction quite a bit. So he was kind of like, there were years where he was around, there were years he wasn't. And I remember so vividly a phone conversation I had with him. I was at a sleepover at a friend's house in like 8th grade or something. And I remember where I was standing in her bedroom, and like I remember everything about the room. And I remember him saying on the phone, because I was crying about something, and he said, "You really need to toughen up." And it's funny how that memory really stuck with me, like, and I was so angry at the time because I was like, I mean, I also felt like he had no right to give me any sort of parental advice because he was so uninvolved. But it really hurt me. And it was a reaction. Me crying was a reaction to a disappointment, that he hadn't shown up to something, or he had let me down in some way. And then he was telling me that I needed to toughen up, that I wasn't allowed to be upset about that, which was so confusing and like maddening. So I definitely had a lot of anger about that for a long time. But yeah, I think part of me wondered if he was right and felt sort of like wounded and small. And part of me was like, no, like, screw that, like, I don't need to toughen up. I'm allowed to be sad. So it was very conflicting, but
You're just giving such great information that is giving me information about you and answering the question of the day at the same time. Because when we look at sensitivity and the child and the parent, where all of this starts, this is where it starts. Childhood is where it starts, and we think of how a child falls down,
mm,
and we say, just naturally, not even meaning to be mean or
right,
to ignore the child, we say, oh, don't cry, don't
right,
cry. And we're cuddling the child and saying, don't cry, instead of letting the crying be okay and saying, here, let me hold you, just let me hold you.
for
And
sure.
so that's sort of the mild level of not realizing how much we impact a child. And then we have the moderate level, which is, oh, come on, let's just get back on the bike. It's okay. Let's just get back on the bike. And
Right,
the
you're
kids,
fine.
you're fine. And
Yeah,
that good cat, the "you're fine" statement, not meant to be destructive, but you're marginalizing and ignoring the child's feelings. Or at the other end, which is what you experienced, you were coming forward saying, I'm hurting.
Mm,
I'm hurting, I'm pain, I'm being vulnerable, I'm sharing this that I'm in pain. And the parent basically, whack-a-moling you and saying, nope, nope, it's your problem. You're too sensitive. You go toughen up.
right. Right.
Meaning, yeah, let's put this wall around Bex or whoever it is. Let's put this wall, get tougher, get stronger, and
Mhm.
please, Bex, don't feel those feelings. We don't want your feelings are not helpful. What a message to a child.
For sure. Yeah. And I think like it's hard. I think it's just so uncomfortable for a lot of us as humans to sit with someone else's sadness or whatever it is that they're feeling. And so that's why we sort of push it back onto them because we just can't cope with it, But it's so sad when it happens to a child because they're not necessarily equipped to say like, oh well that person just couldn't take responsibility for their actions, or that person just, they don't have that awareness yet, and they really believe whatever you tell them about who they are, and so they grow up believing they have these like flaws, which is so sad.
It is because then those kids turn into the teenagers who ignore their feelings, and then into the young adults, and then into the adults who bring into their relationships and their parenting that feelings are, we want to avoid them. We want to be okay. And it's interesting as I talk a lot about that we have five core emotions: fear, sadness, anger, joy, and disgust. And from those five emotions come thousands of feelings based upon how our emotions are registered in the brain and then interconnected with past experience and outcome, all of these feelings. And in our society, and I would like your input on this, and it sounds like for the person who wrote in, being a male, for males, I believe that they are taught that being okay and being angry are the two core acceptable ways of being. And for women, for most of us, we are taught that being okay, but definitely happy. Happy is, which is not even an emotion, but happy is the way to be. So if a woman's sad, it's kind of okay. She's allowed to go there for a little bit, but not too long.
Well on it.
Not too, no, don't dwell on. And to go into anger, oh my God, no, if you're a real woman and you're a nurturing woman, you should never get angry. You should never say no. You should never, all these shoulds. And so when we look at, if we are confined, gender wise to basically one emotion or feeling per gender, I'm really simplifying it,
Right.
then look at how many we're missing out on.
Right.
All of these other emotions that we are told are not okay or should be avoided. And it's what do you think of that?
Yeah, I think that's so true. I think in a way, a close friend of mine, my best friend, she's kind of my guru. I always ask her for advice, and she always says like sadness and anger are like they're cousins, like anger is very often just sort of a different way of expressing like what's lying underneath it is sadness very often, and vice versa can happen. And I think when you only feel like the acceptable emotion is anger, as a man, very often what's underneath it is feeling hurt, and so it's so unfortunate because in relationships, especially relationships that are heterosexual, where there's a man and a woman, and they've been brought up in a society that taught them that they only have this one acceptable emotion, there's a lot of misunderstandings that happen because if you see your male significant other constantly getting angry and you don't know that deep down they're really just sad, you might be able to have more compassion for them and problem solve better if you were able to see their sadness, versus anger, which is just sometimes kind of scary, so I think it creates a lot of conflicts in relationships, and it makes it hard to be compassionate toward each other when we're not allowed to feel the full spectrum of emotions. But
I love that you naturally brought this up because it's such, I could go off on this tangent for a couple hours.
yep.
I 100% agree with you. Years ago, I worked on juvenile probation with
Mm,
this special division, and there was what we called the anger iceberg.
mm,
And you have the anger on top and underneath. And I would show this diagram to these young men who were often very
mm,
angry because that is the okay emotion for a, person who identifies as being a male. And so there they are, anger, and then underneath, as they started doing their work, they would find sadness,
mm,
disappointment, grief,
mm,
frustration, irritation, all of these different emotions that had been pent up for,
mm.
sometimes they would have have memories from 3 years old,
Wow.
5 years old, 7 year old memories where they were saying, and most of them were, 7, 8, 9, 10 year old from that age period. And they would remember being yelled at, screamed at, burned, all of these different things, just horrible things. And all pent up. And so, of course, they are now adolescents or late adolescents, and they're acting out in the only way they were ever told was okay, and in ways that were acted out on them. So a
Right.
father or a mom's boyfriend or somebody had taken, rage out on them. So they learned that that's what they do. And then when they do it, then they end up on probation. And they're thinking, what else am I supposed to do? This is what I was taught. And often I see it in my current client population where there will be a man, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70s, and they've never addressed the childhood trauma. And they're
Mm,
walking around with this, they may do good at work, they may seem fine, but when they get behind closed doors in a relationship, that anger starts coming out because that is, and I believe, as you were saying, your dad is a sensitive. I believe, or I'm sorry, you're saying your dad was an addict. I believe behind a lot of addiction
oh yeah.
is the huge sensitivity where defense becomes,
Mm,
anger becomes the defense mechanism.
mm.
And so the anger is there and it's the defense. The addiction is there that's defending, against all of that inside that is shame, hurt, sadness, disappointment.
Yeah, everything you're saying is resonates so much. And I feel like what you're describing in many ways is like what perpetuates intergenerational trauma, because when you aren't dealing with those feelings and then you become a parent and then you're sort of reenacting all those things that you experienced during childhood, and it just keeps going on and on and on. And I feel like I've made it my life's mission to like, it needs to stop here with me, like I don't want to pass those messages on to my potential future children. Because the more I learned about my father's childhood and the messages he was told he had a learning disability. He was dyslexic, and he was told that he was never going to amount to anything, that nothing should be expected of him, basically, that he was lazy and stupid. And he grew up with an alcoholic mother and a very absent father who told him to toughen up. And the more I learned about his upbringing, I was like, okay, he wasn't given many tools here to like be a very empathetic parent or a present parent, or like, so I have a lot more compassion for him now, but um I'm just not willing to sort of lean into my own trauma and just pass it on. I still have a lot to work on. I think most of us do, but at least I'm aware of what I've taken from my childhood experiences and what I want to sort of leave behind.
Thank you. So beautifully put. I agree. And you have such an old soul quality about you because you're very conversant and articulate about these very simple yet
Mm.
huge details that make our place on the planet either one where we're making a difference and breaking the intergenerational transmission of violence, the
Mhm.
intergenerational transmission of any form of abuse or negative pattern whatsoever. And so rather than reacting to it or carrying it on, when you're, I agree with you 100%. That's the whole purpose actually of my next book that comes out in early 2024, The Joy of Imperfect Love. I start from an attachment perspective, looking from
Mhm.
childhood forward and saying, wait, this is not about us being perfect at all. We will never be perfect. We will always, if you're working on yourself, be prepared for a lifetime of work. That's what I look at. It's for me, it's like, oh, it's not that I will ever stop working. It's just, what do I work on today? What way is it coming up? And when we look at work that way, especially people who came from difficult childhoods. And most
Mhm.
people didn't have a perfect childhood, which means we all have work to do. And when
Yeah.
we look at it as you're looking at it, not blaming or shaming dad or mom, but eyes wide open, saying, wait a second. I can see what was happening, or I can try to understand it, even if you can't see it, just to try to understand it
Mhm.
so that you can embrace whatever they did that was positive
Mhm.
and let go of whatever they did that was negative and say, I'm going to do this differently. I'm
Yeah.
going to, whether I have kids or not, but maybe I'm an aunt or an uncle or a teacher, or if I have a relationship, a committed relationship, or I'm dating, I'm not going to take these patterns out
Yeah.
on my partner or my kids or my students. And to
Mhm.
me, that's our responsibility, not just a right, but it's our responsibility to be mindful about how we're showing up in the world.
Totally. Yeah. And it helps too with the more you understand about sort of your parents' experiences and their backgrounds, it helps with depersonalizing a lot of what they did with you because you start to realize that, it had nothing to do with you. It was just sort of, it all stems back to their own childhood and how they were raised. And it helps with sort of forgiveness too. It's been a process sort of forgiving my parents for their mistakes. All parents make mistakes, but I'm definitely still in my own relationship. I just got married in June and I see like patterns in myself and my own relationship that I'm like, oh, that's old. That goes back to me and my mom, like my fear of confrontation or I'm more likely to hide things or be passive aggressive than I am to just be honest and upfront, because I didn't feel safe doing that. And so these are things I'm like, I'm still working on all the time, but it's a journey. It's an exhausting journey, but it's a worthy one, I think. So
Absolutely. And I love that you brought that up. First of all, congratulations on being a
yeah.
newlywed. Congratulations. And a bigger congratulations, much, much bigger congratulations on the fact that you're doing work in the relationship. Anyone can get married. It takes really special people. Anyone can be in a relationship, marriage, not marriage. It takes really special people to be committed to doing the work to evolve one
Yeah.
day, one step at a time, in ways that their parents might not have, done or known how to do. And you're looking at this and saying, I'm listening to you with such admiration and saying, oh my goodness, this is fabulous. You're seeing passive aggressiveness and you're not just saying, oh, whatever, it's how I get my needs met. I'm just going to do that. And you're seeing these patterns coming up. You're saying, that's not the person I want to be as a woman, as a partner in this relationship. It's not the kind of, maybe if you want to be a mom someday, it's not the kind of mom my goodness, Bex. I am so impressed.
Oh, thank you. You're giving me so much credit. I feel like it's the first step, right? Is just being aware of these habits and tendencies and patterns that we don't like. I'm not, I haven't, kicked all of them yet, but at least I'm able to recognize when it's happening. And yeah, I think that's the you have to start somewhere, and that's the first step. So
I agree with you. It's the awareness. It
Mm,
is the awareness that is the first step, the non-judgmental. In every book I've written, that's what I say. It's how I work with my clients. It's the awareness. It's the ability to pause, to self-reflect,
mm,
to just put up a little stop sign for a minute and say, wait a second, I'm doing this, or I've done this. Could I have done it differently? Just the awareness. And as soon as you become aware, because we can never unknow what we know.
right.
Once we know, wait a second, that was a passive aggressive remark, or wait a minute, I saw that look, or I made my partner cry. We can never unknow that. So then the next step is, let me apologize. Let me make my brain rewired so that next time, not only will I hope I don't make that same mistake, but if I do, I'll catch it much quicker and I can
Yeah,
prepare that rupture, because there will be ruptures in relationships. We can't avoid that. What we can avoid is ignoring them or doing the old, oh, it's your fault. You clean up your own mess. You're too sensitive. Go get deal with your problem on your own. That's the easy thing for the insensitive or abusive person to do.
yeah, totally. I think it's helpful when you notice yourself resorting to those old habits and patterns to think like, well, after the fact, even how could I have handled that differently? Like in my best version of myself, how would I have wanted someone else to handle that with me, but it is really hard when these behaviors are so ingrained. And I also find that it's helpful to understand the why behind them. Like for the longest time, I had this habit of getting really defensive and like panicked when my partner would point out something, just something silly, like, why did you put that dish there? Or like, can you take your shoes off? Or, something like that. And I would literally start becoming my voice would get raised and I would get really defensive. And he would be like, what is happening right now? Like, why are you reacting like that? I wasn't mad. I was just pointing something out to you. And I had to sort of like take a step back and realize, oh, I know why that's happening. Because growing up, if I did something wrong around the house, I would be screamed at. Like my mother would go into a rage and I would hide in my closet, So it's,
Oh,
I look back and I'm like, of course. That's why now if someone points something small out, it hasn't registered to me yet that no, this is someone different. This is my partner and they're not mad at me. It just I become like a little kid again that needs to defend themselves, and is like, no, 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 I'm sorry, I didn't mean to, So that's taken some time to work through, but like knowing where it comes from helps me be compassionate toward the little kid that's still inside me somewhere.
absolutely, Bex. And I agree with you completely that until we go back and rescue, that little kid over and over and over again, and that little kid at all different ages in life until the abuse stopped. And if it ever did stop, because some people, it's still occurring with different people. But when we look at that and say, and I love how you approach it, that you want to be compassionate with that sensitive child that's getting triggered. You want to understand where the roots are, because we all have histories. We all have relationships in our past, whether it's mom, dad, caregivers, early boyfriends, early girlfriends, later boyfriends, girlfriends who may have added to the trauma. And if
Right.
we don't address that, then we're taking all of those cumulative traumas out on our current partner.
Yeah.
Not fair.
I know. And I can't tell you how many times he's been like, I'm not your mom, and I'm like, I know that on a logical level, but it's really hard. Like there's something sort of visceral that takes over that's triggered. And I feel like I'm just, thrown back in time. It's like very strange how that can happen so quickly.
It it does happen so much. I see it in my clinical work constantly, because when our brains are formed, right? Everything is formed around that early brain, then prefrontal cortex comes in. So our early memories are really protected. And then those patterns for however many decades you've been on the planet, if you've been on the planet 30 years, they were hardwired in for 30 years. If you're on the planet 40, 50, 60 years, they're hardwired. All of those fear-based patterns are hardwired in. And then so people go to therapy, if they do go to therapy, and they think, oh, well, 3 sessions will do it. And I'm thinking, 3 sessions and you're 50 years old and you think three
Oh,
50-minute sessions is going to rewire your brain that had 50 years
50
of this.
years.
I wish it would work that quickly, but and it also depends on how much you're actively working it in the external world. But I think that's one piece. And then another piece is that people often come and say, well, I'm 40 now or 65 now, and I had this trauma as a kid, but it shouldn't affect me
Mm,
now because I'm older. And I always answer, and you're perfect proof of it, trauma does not know chronological time.
mm,
Trauma only knows when you start working on it and how much you work on it. That's how trauma gets resolved. Chronological time doesn't do it.
yeah, it's so, so true. Yeah. And sometimes it's helpful, like, I mean, I found myself getting so frustrated with how much time it was taking me to overcome some of these patterns. And my therapist at the time would say, you have to think of these reactions that you're having to these triggers as like they're pathways through the woods that have been trodden down by, think of thousands of people trotting down a path. And so trying to form a new neural pathway, it's like you're treading through the woods with no path. It's going to take some time to keep going down this new path and sort of carve it out before you can go there. Like it's going to take practice and just be patient. I'm very impatient. So
Well, I love the metaphor that she was using about the pathways. And I often talk when I'm working with clients on, I say, think about it when you get on a highway and you're on the major highway and you really want to go to the supermarket, but you end up in the next town because that's where you work, but it's a Saturday, so your brain just got on the highway. You weren't even thinking about it. It's not your fault. You just didn't even notice that there was an exit. And so we have to slow down to say, wait a second, I'm going to put up a little detour sign here and try my best next time when I get on that highway to remember here's a detour. And the more we take that detour and create that and we see that stop sign or that hazard sign, the more we will learn to take that other one. But at first, we've traveled that road to work, many, many times, and we're going to go there automatically. So we have to remember detour sign and or stop sign and off here's, and that takes mindfulness. And for people who are impatient or reactive or simply human and imperfect, we will often not even see the stop sign or the
yeah.
hazard sign, and we just go straight down that pathway. And then we're wondering, how did I get here? And why am I in conflict with my poor partner? And and you know, the best thing to do, and I imagine it sounds like you do it, it's like, hey, hun, I'm so sorry. This is what I did. This is what I'll do differently in the future. Thanks for being patient with me. Something like that.
Yeah. And there have been times where, and like obviously we're not perfect in every conflict, but there have been times where my partner will say, whoa, like that was what's happening here? Like what's going on? Because he'll notice that my reaction is maybe seems like disproportionate to what's going on. And this doesn't always happen. Sometimes my reaction where I'm triggered then triggers him and then it escalates and we're out of control. We're not perfect and that happens. But then sometimes he's able to say, like, hey, whoa, like it seemed like that, like really, like you seem really angry. Like, what's going on? Like, what are you feeling? And so, and just approaching it with curiosity, which is so helpful. Because that gives me a moment that's sort of disarming and it gives me a moment to be like, oh yeah, I don't know. What is that? What is happening? And brings me back to the present before I go into full fight or flight mode, So
Well,
yeah.
it sounds like you have created a lot of good resources. You've been in therapy to work with all of this, to help this innate sensitivity
Mhm.
become the superpower that it is for you to be vulnerable with your husband, to have a lovely relationship that's not perfect. I don't know of any relationship that is perfect, but the big green flag to me is anytime I hear partners saying, "Hey, we're working on it. We're working
Mm,
on it. I'm becoming more aware. We're growing." That's what it's all about. The green flag of I'm working on it. And so that now so do you have any other tips for our listeners about how to use their creativity or any part of who they are as a
mhm.
superpower? And before I get your response, I do want to just add this piece that I've noticed to make sure it doesn't get forgotten along the way. I've noticed with a lot of people, they'll say something like, "You're too sensitive. I don't like your sensitivity. It's awful. It's all your problem. You go fix all this." Yet they don't like one side of the person's sensitivity, but the
Mhm.
other part of the person's sensitivity, where they're the nurturer or the caregiver or the doer or the one who, makes the meals and tends to all of the bits and pieces and is the lovey-dovey one. They like
Mhm.
that side of the sensitivity. That the
Right.
part that gets triggered when pain is caused, the part that they don't like the other side, they just want to cut the person in half and take only that part of the person. Have you experienced that, and what do you think?
So true. So true. I mean, I think with me and my husband, like we're so different. He's very direct and very sort of blunt in his communication. He's very, if I have a problem with you, I'm just going to tell you, and I'm going to tell you exactly, what I'm thinking and feeling. And he has no, and I am like tiptoeing around people and so worried about hurting anyone's feelings or making them mad at me or like, and it's so different. And so we always say, like in the beginning of our relationship, that was really challenging because he would want me to be more direct and upfront, and I wanted him to be more sensitive and more sort of soft with his delivery. And so we're constantly trying to find like a middle ground. But I think it took realizing, like I remember saying, you don't get my sort of those nurturing qualities and my empathy and my really good listening ear, or my sort of taking care of you when you're upset or whatever. You don't get any of that without this other side of my sensitivity, that I do get hurt, and wounded, and I do kind of feel everything very intensely. But
Mhm.
there's a good side to that too. And I had to sort of realize that with him, those qualities that he has that are so opposite of me and do create conflict sometimes, there are so many situations where I'm so grateful that he is like that, because I can't deal with confronting, we're at a hotel and there's some issue, and I know that he has no problem going in there and taking, talking to whoever he needs to talk to make sure that something's fixed or whatever. So I think, like, yeah, with most qualities, there's a positive and a negative side, especially with sensitivity. And I recognize that. Do I love being sensitive all the time? No. Sometimes I feel like my feelings get so hurt, and it's like, and I take things so personally all the time, and I don't love that. There are times where I wish I could just brush something off a little more easily, but I don't think I wouldn't change that quality for the world. And my partner has said, I don't want you to change. I don't want you to be any different. And that's very healing to hear.
Yes, and I love that he says that to you, that he loves your sensitivity. It also sounds like he is a pretty self-aware, self-reflective human being,
Mm.
that despite being straightforward, it sounds like he's also highly supportive and sounds like has a good temper on him too.
Yeah, I feel like we definitely, I think we both had a lot of childhood trauma, and that came up a lot early in our relationship. We had some pretty, like, really intense arguments, and we got to a point where I was kind of like, is this healthy? Like, should we be together? And then I realized that we were bringing up a lot of unresolved trauma in each other that no other relationship had brought up for me. And I thought, maybe this is a gift though. Maybe this is going to force me to grow, Um, but it's hard
One,
to tell. Yeah.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. Is your husband, did he engage in therapy? Did he do a lot of self-work or any self-work?
He does his own kind of self-work. I don't
Mm.
think he's ever done traditional therapy. He works on mindfulness a lot. He's a very spiritual person, so I think praying for him. We've been trying to do like breathing exercises together, things like that.
Absolutely. Well, I'll tell you, there are more ways than psychotherapy to do self-work, and that self-work and being mindful and praying and being spiritual,
Mm,
absolutely, that can do the trick. It's so interesting that you're bringing this up, and we're going way in another tangent, but the piece about relationships and the healing power, I absolutely believe that. And that is part of my next book where I talk about how sometimes these two people come together where there's this friction, and that friction is either a curse or a gift. And
mhm,
if you use that friction, if it's coming from two people who have trauma that's unresolved and both people are willing to work on it, you get the joy of growing in ways that you could never do in any other relationship. Because if that person is there for the long haul with you and you're both mindful about doing that work, not only are you getting healed, and the partner's getting healed, but you're creating this relationship that becomes so beautiful because it's knitted together by
mhm,
such conscious love and such mindful healing. And then the other direction is to just not do your work, and then the relationship, you two people, having difficulties. And if one person's working at their stuff and the other person isn't working at their stuff, the one person's work is so much harder. And then the other person sort of devolves or stays stagnant while the other person is just going, okay, I'm getting wiser. I'm getting wiser. So I agree with you. I think that our romantic relationships hold such power for self
mhm.
growth and other growth when we use them wisely. You're bringing up such amazing points, Bex. Um, I just love this conversation. I think it's going to not only help the person who wrote in, but listeners everywhere who have been told that their sensitivity is not a superpower. And you've really helped illuminate that when we use our sensitivity wisely and we work on it, it really does become a superpower. So back to you for some more tips before we wind up. I'd love to hear more ideas.
Yeah, for the listener.
Yeah, or for anyone, just about what are
Mm,
ways that you've just covered so many bases. I could have done 3 podcasts with you on different topics, but some ways that you have found I can do X, Y, or Z. Again, you've already offered a lot, but to really take the superpower from a perceived weakness,
mm,
the sensitivity, I don't want to see it as a weakness or a liability, but here's
mhm.
how I make it a superpower.
Yeah, I think one thing that I've noticed with a lot of highly sensitive people like myself is in social situations, I find myself naturally being very aware of what everyone around me is feeling and what their experience of that social situation is. And um I don't know why or where this comes from, but very often I end up taking on this role of I want to make sure everyone feels included. I notice that person over there looks a little awkward. I'm going to go over, I'm going to introduce them to someone else, or I'm going to strike up a conversation with them, or that person's looking around like they need something, or being very in tune with everyone else's sort of emotional life. And that can be really exhausting sometimes,
Mhm.
but it's also a really great power And in terms of, if you're hosting an event or you're at an event, just making people feel comfortable, and connecting people with other people. And I think that can be a really great thing. I think having someone to sort of play that part can really put people at ease. And so I like hosting people at my house, and I like planning events because I get to sort of like exercise that power. And then in terms of creative pursuits, you don't have to have like an incredible singing voice or be like, a trained painter or whatever to benefit from the arts. Like, I think, even if you start with just journaling, or if it's, singing in your car, or, playing an instrument, even if it's playing it badly, I think all of these things they kind of provide a safe outlet for expressing all of those emotions that in everyday life you might be told are too much, or whatever, by someone who feels threatened by your sensitivity. So I would say find something you enjoy, whether you think that you're good at it or not. And I think that there's a lot of catharsis to be found in that.
I agree with you on both, and I also agree with you on the exhausting part of being the person who's reading the room and tending to everybody. So it can be really a wonderful way to read the room and be nurturing and caring, but also being aware, as you were saying, that it can be exhausting. So you don't need to do it all the time, and you don't need to do it
No.
if you don't want to. And if you're getting enjoyment, and as you said, it makes you grow that part of you, but you're so mindful of it. So I love that one. I love the other part about the creative outlet, whether it's music, journaling, um, making cookies, whatever it is that makes you feel like you can feel your feelings and have an outlet for your feelings, to make
Yeah.
it and a safe space just to express, draw, color,
Yeah.
paint, you know, play kickball with your dog, whatever it is. It just makes you feel like you have a place for all of these emotions that are a
Yeah.
natural part.
For sure. And I think it's also helpful to have relationships with, I'm very fortunate that a lot of my girlfriends just happen to be highly sensitive people, but I think it's good to have just at least just one person in your life that is also sensitive and that kind of understands what comes with that, and that can be kind of a safe space and a sounding board, and can empathize with what it's like to live in this world as a sensitive person. So
Thank you for adding that piece. You're right, because there are so many people in the world who have learned not to honor or acknowledge their sensitivity. So these are big defenses. And I'm a highly sensitive person as well. And so me being out in the world, we need to know and our boundaries. We need to have our nice boundaries up and know our needs, because the world for sensitive people can be a pretty stingy kind of place to be. It can be, when you feel everything, it can be a lot. So we need to have good self-care.
yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So Bex, where can our listeners find you?
Yeah. So you can find any of my writing, and a lot of my writing centers around relationships and health and well-being, especially mental health. That is on Well and Good, Insider, um, Ask Men, Men's Health, Bustle. So I write for a number of different sites, Clean
You do.
Plate. Yeah. But and then my music is all under my stage name, Bex, just Bex. But I believe there are multiple Bexes out in the music world. So the best way to find my music is to search Bex with either the title of my recent single, which was Sensitive, or the title of my album, which was Sink or Swim. And it's on Spotify and Apple Music and YouTube and all of those places.
So Bex, as a treat for our listeners, I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you, would you like to belt out a line or two from one of your songs for us? Feel free to say no.
Sure. One of the lines that sticks out to me is from the bridge, and it goes, It doesn't mean that I am broken just 'cause you break my heart wide open. It doesn't mean that I am broken just 'cause it doesn't mean that I am broken just 'cause you break my heart wide open. It doesn't mean that I am broken just 'cause.
Oh, you're making me cry. Oh my goodness. Oh, that w oh, what a oh my goodness. Oh, that's so beautiful. Wow.
Oh, thank you.
Wow. Wow. Thanks for
So why
sharing.
did that
Oh,
really landed on you? I'm so
that did really land on me. Wow. Big
glad.
reaction. Wow.
Yes.
Thanks. Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you
thank
for
you.
your music. Thank you for sharing your time. And thank you most of all for being you and for
Oh,
joining us. It's been such a pleasure, such
this
an
was a
honor.
real treat. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And this is Imperfect Love.
Thanks so much for sharing your time with me today. Remember, you have the power to transform your life and love fearlessly, if imperfectly, and it's my privilege to help you along the way. You can find more life-changing content, including my books and other podcast episodes, at drcarlamanley.com. Feel free to submit your own confidential questions through my website. I'll do my very best to include your issue on a future episode. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Until we connect again, this is Dr. Carla Marie Manley wishing you oceans of blessings and love. Please note, this podcast is psychoeducational in nature and is not intended to replace formal mental health support. Please contact your healthcare provider or emergency hotline if you need psychiatric care. And as always, please take good care of your amazing, wonderful self.